May 1923, Osage County, Oklahoma. He stepped off the Midland Valley freight line into a landscape choked by oil derricks and sudden wealth. But the dusty roads carried an unspoken, paralyzing tension he could not yet explain. He walked toward Pawhuska, noting the staggering cost of basic survival here. A simple loaf of bread cost $1, as the local economy warped entirely around the immense oil royalties flooding the once quiet reservation lands. He avoided the crowded boarding houses, sleeping beneath a railway bridge outside town. From the shadows, he watched expensive new automobiles speed down dirt roads, driven by people who seemed constantly looking over their own shoulders. The notes describe a profound unease settling over the county by nightfall. He saw outsiders arriving daily on every train drawn by the money, but he realized quickly that something far more organized was quietly happening. He had traveled west from the rail yards of Kansas to find harvest work. Instead, he found a region where honest labor meant nothing and where the federal guardianship system controlled the immense wealth of the locals. He spent his first morning navigating the chaotic main street, searching for day labor. He observed white guardians dictating every purchase for the Osage citizens, restricting their access to their own oil money with absolute cold authority. Moving through the crowded market, he noticed a deliberate pattern to the sudden violence. He recorded hearing about 3 recent unexplained deaths in the county, all officially labeled as accidents by the suspiciously unbothered local authorities. He rested near a hardware store, listening to the quiet conversations of frightened locals. The official records claimed poisonings and shootings were isolated tragedies, but he could see the systemic erasure happening right in front of him. He found a few hours of work unloading lumber for a new construction site. The wages were unusually high, but he quickly understood this was hush money for workers expected to ignore the bodies being quietly buried. He slept out in the tall grass near the oil fields that second night. The rhythmic pounding of the derricks shook the earth beneath him, a constant mechanical heartbeat driving the greed that was steadily consuming the town. By sunrise, the unpaved streets of Pawhuska had turned to heavy mud under the weight of supply wagons. He stood near the bank, watching local Osage families purchase necessities under the aggressive, suffocating supervision of the men who controlled their accounts. He walked past the local undertaker's parlor, noting a grim efficiency that defied the town's size. 3 bodies had arrived in 2 days, all young, all wealthy, and all officially recorded as tragic misfortunes by a sheriff who asked 0 questions. His name does not appear in these notes, not once. Whether that was deliberate or whether the notes simply never reached the pages where he wrote it, we don't know yet. If you want to be here when we find out, subscribe. The road continues. He left the suffocating streets of Pawhuska on a Tuesday, following the Midland Valley tracks toward Fairfax. The heat baked the wooden ties, but moving openly along the rail line felt safer than lingering in a town built on quiet murder. Let me tell you about Osage land in 1923 because you need to understand the greed. This wasn't just oil. It was hundreds of millions of dollars flowing beneath the feet of a marginalized people the government refused to protect. He camped a mile outside Fairfax, boiling coffee over a smokeless fire. An older drifter passing eastward stopped just long enough to warn him that strangers asking questions in this valley rarely lived long enough to board a train out. He spent 15 cents on a tin of beans at a general store the next morning. While he ate on the wooden porch, he watched a newly appointed guardian coldly deny an Osage woman the money needed for her child's medical care. The road logic here was entirely inverted. Usually an empty highway offered danger and a wealthy town offered safety. But he documented the exact opposite. The closer you stood to the wealth of Fairfax, the closer you stood to an uninvestigated grave. This is not the kind of thing that appears in official records. The county didn't document the suffocating dread. What we have is a notation in his margin describing how the town went entirely silent when certain wealthy cattlemen entered a room. He sought shelter in an abandoned barn as a sudden spring storm rolled across the plains. Through the rotting wooden planks, he watched 3 unbadged men carefully inspecting the undercarriage of an Osage family's automobile parked near a distant creek. The explosion tore through the valley hours after midnight, shaking dust from the barn's rafters. He didn't run toward the blast. His notes reveal he packed his bag in the dark, understanding immediately that witnesses to this kind of fire were liabilities. By dawn, he was walking 5 miles south of the smoking wreckage. The record state an Osage family's home was destroyed by nitroglycerin, but he recorded how deputies deliberately trampled the surrounding evidence before ever securing the perimeter. He survived the next 3 days, avoiding main roads, rationing a single block of stale cheese. Every passing vehicle forced him into the tall grass as armed men began patrolling the county lines looking for anyone who didn't belong to the syndicate. Let me tell you about local law enforcement in 1923 because it tells you everything about what he was choosing. Going to the police didn't bring safety. It simply provided the killers with your exact name and location. He finally risked entering a rail camp to find fresh water. The rail workers, mostly transient men like him, spoke in hushed tones about federal agents arriving in secret, though nobody knew if they could actually stop the ongoing systematic slaughter. The tension inside the camp was unbearable. Every stranger was suspected of being a killer or an investigator. He drank his fill from the communal pump, knowing that lingering in a place thick with paranoia was just another way to get shot. He left the camp before noon, following a dry creek bed northward. His boots were wearing painfully thin against the rocky Oklahoma soil, and the physical toll of constant, hyper-vigilant movement was beginning to fracture his usually steady pace. He documented finding a discarded leather satchel near a steep ravine. It contained nothing of value, just ripped financial ledgers bearing an Osage name, confirming that whoever discarded it cared only about destroying the paper trail of manipulated and stolen accounts. He left the satchel exactly where it lay. Touching the dead's belongings in a county where life was this cheap was a surefire way to be framed for murder, so he climbed out of the ravine and kept moving without looking back. By evening, he reached a small settlement completely devoid of law enforcement. He bartered an hour of chopping firewood for a bowl of watery stew, listening as the tavern owner loudly denied knowing anything about the explosions shaking the earth miles away. The tavern's patrons were a mix of hardened oil workers and terrified locals. He sat in the darkest corner watching how the entire room froze when two men in immaculate, expensive suits walked in, ordering whiskey with an arrogant, untouchable authority. He slipped out the back door before they finished their first round. The road at night was treacherous, full of deep ruts and stray cattle, but staying in a room controlled by the syndicate's enforcers was a risk he refused to take. He walked through the pitch-black night, guided only by the distant flares of oil derricks. The burning gas illuminated the clouds in an unnatural, hellish orange, casting twisting shadows that made every rustle in the grass feel like an ambush. By morning, his clothes were soaked with dew and his muscles ached from the relentless miles. He documented finding a hidden spot beneath an old wooden water tower where he could sleep through daylight while remaining entirely invisible to the road. The next afternoon, the sound of an approaching train woke him. It wasn't a freight train. It was a heavily guarded passenger line carrying men from Washington, investigators sent to finally document the staggering number of murders local law had actively ignored. He watched from the brush as these suited men disembarked at the next station. They carried typewriters and thick leather briefcases, representing a federal force that was about to collide violently with the entrenched, bloody power structure of Osage County. Now think about what that road looked like in the spring of that year. The killers still held the power, the money still flowed, and the arrival of federal agents only made the desperate men who controlled the town infinitely more dangerous. He didn't stay to watch the arrests or the ensuing trials. He knew the road demanded forward motion. Lingering in a war zone between federal agents and wealthy murderers offered absolutely nothing to a man whose only asset was his anonymity. He spent his last cents on a meager portion of dried meat from a frightened vendor. The transaction was silent, both men understanding that words were dangerous in a place where people were routinely killed for knowing too much about their neighbors. Moving under thick evening fog, he approached the northern rail yards. He navigated the complex maze of steel tracks and hissing steam engines, looking for an open boxcar heading anywhere that wasn't drenched in the blood of oil wealth. He found a westbound freight train slowly building pressure for departure. As he hoisted himself into the dark, splintered interior of an empty car, he recorded a final observation about the town he was leaving behind in the suffocating Oklahoma night. This is not the kind of thing that appears in official records. The federal reports detailed the masterminds and convictions, but his notes captured the cold, mechanical efficiency of how a whole society agreed to look away while their neighbors were slaughtered. He sat on the rough wooden floor as the train lurched forward. Through the sliding door, he watched oil derricks fade into the distance, monuments to a kind of wealth he would never possess, built on a cost he would never pay. The documented history of Osage County eventually saw the worst of the conspirators sent to federal prison. The reign of terror ended, but the land remained permanently scarred by betrayal, and the stolen wealth was rarely returned to its rightful owners. The journey out of Oklahoma took 4 brutal, freezing nights in that boxcar. He survived on the dried meat and collected rainwater, his body absorbing the punishing rhythm of the iron wheels as the landscape shifted from flat plains to high desert. He never wrote about the Osage murders again after crossing the state line. The event was a monstrous anomaly on his path, a horrific intersection of human greed and vulnerability that he had narrowly managed to walk through and survive. The road ahead promised nothing but more distance and different kinds of survival. He was headed toward the copper mines of the Southwest, seeking the anonymity of hard labor in a place where men were measured by sweat, not oil royalties. The last record that places him passing through the Osage region is dated late May 1923. After that, there is only a long stretch of blank pages, suggesting a period of relentless, uninterrupted travel across the unforgiving American expanse. The Osage Nation still exists, their history inextricably linked to the wealth beneath their soil and the blood spilled over it. What he carried forward from that corrupted valley is not recorded. The road doesn't keep that kind of account. If this is the kind of historical storytelling you want to keep following, subscribe to the channel. More roads, more cases, more of what the official record left out. And if you know this era, this region, or this kind of road, tell us in the comments what you know, what the records missed, what your family remembered that nobody wrote down. The people who lived this history are the reason anyone can reconstruct it. We want to hear from them.